Hello to everyone joining us today. Thank you for joining us on our America's Job Exchange webinar with our featured partner, Biddle Consulting Group. Today we're preparing for OFCCP's new Section 503 Focused Reviews. I'm Lauren Remus. I'm with America's Job Exchange, and I'm thrilled to have Matt Nussbaum with us from Biddle Consulting Group's BCGI Institute. Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm going to get to that. I just wanted to say good morning from sunny California and good afternoon to those of you out east, and welcome to the monthly webinar series sponsored by America's Job Exchange. I'm very pleased to have been asked to present to you today on how to prepare for OFCCP's quote-unquote new Section 503 focused reviews. New is in quotes there because focused reviews aren't exactly new, but we'll get to that. But first, if we can advance the slide. Who is this person? My name is Matt Nussbaum, and I'm the director of BCGI, the Biddle Consulting Group's Institute for Workforce Development. And I'm one of the nation's leading experts on equal employment opportunity and affirmative action in the workplace today. Now, when people talk about EEO, things can get a little hairy. And when someone utters the term affirmative action, there tend to be a lot of feelings, mainly because there's a tremendous amount of misinformation surrounding those topics. People think they know what affirmative action is all about, and about 95% of them are usually dead wrong. But that doesn't stop them from bloviating, often loudly and with a sense of authority. But when Jimmy down at the bar starts on his rant against affirmative action, I want you to ask yourself, is Jimmy one of the nation's leading experts on EEO and AA in the workplace? If the answer is no, I humbly submit that if something I say contradicts something that Jimmy says, well, consider the source. My job over the past decade has been to teach employers how to do affirmative action correctly, and I love what I do. I believe in EEO and AA because I believe in people. And I believe that the best and the brightest emerge from competition on a truly even playing field. So I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, an earthling, an alien. Everyone deserves to take their shot and have a fair shake. Everyone benefits from that, and no one is harmed. So that's my quick pitch for what I do. I'll climb down from my soapbox. Before I went to law school, I was a computer programmer, so I understand a lot of the challenges you face putting together a compliant and meaningful affirmative action program that is so dependent on the quality of your data and your ability to analyze it. Before that, I ran the plumbing department of an Ace hardware store, and I'm proud to say I've still never met a toilet that I couldn't fix. And I worked for a time as a professional magician and party clown, and that's a dark chapter in my life that I don't like to talk about much. So let's advance the slide. Do I have control? I do not.
I believe you do. All right, then I'll try it from my side.
If I do, I am unable.
Hold on, folks. We'll be with you in a minute.
There we go. So what is BCGI? That's the education and training arm of the Biddle Consulting Group that's responsible for filling the gaps in traditional compliance offerings and providing subscribing members with everything they need to help their organization be fully compliant with a range of federal and state workplace compliance obligations. The Biddle Consulting Group provides affirmative action plan consulting and fulfillment, including audit and compliance assistance, and our MyAAP enterprise software. We provide HR assessments, including our online job analysis system, test validation and analysis, pre-employment testing services, etc. We have some of the most advanced and robust compensation analysis solutions I've seen yet, starting with our Compare, our proprietary compensation analysis software, all the way up to litigation consulting and expert witness services. BCGI, frankly, is one of the best in the business, which is why I joined the team. I just think they're the bee's knees, but don't take my word for it. If you're not already familiar with us, check us out at biddle.com, and we'll advance this slide. We've got a couple of housekeeping items. I'm going to kick this back to Lauren.
Thank you. So questions. Let's use the chat feature, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the session. Any that we don't get answered today, Matt has promised to follow up on. Please limit the plumbing questions, if at all possible. That would be great. There will be a SHRM code that we will distribute in our post-event email, and as always, there will be a survey in our post-event email that we encourage you to take, provide feedback, let us know how we're doing. We have also got a downloadable handout today, and you'll be able to see that on your screen. You can click to download it at any time. Matt will be talking about that a little bit later in the presentation, and that is something we'd like you all to take a look at when we get there. So I'll hand it back to you, Matt.
All right. So I'm going to jump in with a little bit of background. Not everyone comes to this with all of the full knowledge. This is going to be a kind of a brief overview of OFCCP, EEOC, audits, et cetera, et cetera. 55 years ago, Congress enacted a little piece of legislation that you might have heard of, the Civil Rights Act. The law prohibits discrimination in several contexts. Title VII is where we find the employment context. And it prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. That familiar laundry list is referred to as the protected characteristics because Congress decided that those things, someone's race, sex, etc., are inappropriate to consider as factors when making employment decisions, like hiring, selection for training, promotion, termination, compensation, etc. They are protected from becoming part of the employment decision-making process. Now, for such a large federal law, it's unusually clear. You do not make employment decisions based on people's protected characteristics. That's pretty much it. Hard stop, cue the music. Note that the law does not prohibit discrimination against women or against people of color. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex or race, which means the law goes both ways. Discrimination against men is just as unlawful as discrimination against women. Discrimination against whites is just as unlawful as discrimination against people of color. By the way, the law uses the term minorities to refer to non-white people in the aggregate. I'm not a big fan of that term because it can be misleading and it can be demeaning. I think we need to be able to speak plainly in this business, but we can and should also be respectful. So you'll hear me use the term people of color instead. Okay, back to Title VII. The law is clear. You don't base employment decisions on people's protected characteristics. The Civil Rights Act is enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, and we'll get into that in a little more detail here in just a minute. But just know that if an employee wants to sue you under Title VII, they have to go through the EEOC first. Those are the rules. Advance the slide. Then we've got...
Sorry, our technical difficulties are getting in the way today. Hold on, I'll be there. There we are, thank you.
Here we go, there. We've got Executive Order 11246, signed in the year after the Civil Rights Act in 1965 by the infamously progressive liberal President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Executive orders and their implementing regulations have the force and effect of a law passed by Congress. So don't get hung up on whether or not the executive order is technically a law. It is. EO 11246 also prohibits employers from discriminating on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, just like Title VII. Seems a little redundant because the vast majority of federal contractor employers are also subject to Title VII, but not all. And it gives the federal agency that enforces the executive order concurrent jurisdiction with the EEOC, but we'll get to that here in just a bit. Unlike Title VII, the executive order also requires federal contractor employers to engage in affirmative action to ensure that discrimination is not happening, despite the company's clearly worded policies. That, by the way, is primarily what affirmative action is all about. Making sure that the playing field is even for everyone, and that employment decisions are based on merit, not the luck of the birth lottery. So if affirmative action in your organization involves taking something away from one group and giving it to another, quotas, point systems, set-asides, etc., you're doing it wrong. Except in very specific circumstances, those things are clearly and unambiguously illegal under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The trick, to the extent that there is one here, is finding and engaging in forms of affirmative action that do not violate the law. The executive order is enforced by an agency within the Department of Labor called the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. Whew, that's a mouthful, so we call them OFCCP for short. Employees can file a complaint with the OFCCP, and those complaints are considered to be jointly filed with the EEOC. Mainly, though, OFCCP conducts regular audits of contractors to ensure their compliance in this space. Basically, while the EEOC doesn't come knocking unless they have a reason to do so, the OFCCP likes to just pop in and see how things are going. Let's advance that slide. So EEOC, OFCCP, DOL, that's a lot of alphabet soup. So let's just take a second here to understand the differences between the EEOC and the OFCCP and see why we tend to worry just a little bit more about what the OFCCP is up to, besides the whole tendency to pop in thing. The EEOC is an independent federal agency that enforces a whole host of anti-discrimination laws, including Title VII and some others you may have heard of once or twice, like the Americans with Disabilities Act. They also enforce some that you may not be as familiar with, like GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. That's the one that prohibits employers from discriminating against you not because you have cancer, but because cancer runs in your family. Interesting. Anyway, the EEOC's investigatory scope and authority is relatively limited. Think of a Law and Order episode, pretty much any Law and Order episode, in which the detectives show up at someone's apartment with a warrant to search the premises. The warrant specifies that they're looking for a murder weapon, and it authorizes them to look in all the places where such a weapon might be hidden. If along the way they see something in plain sight, like, I don't know, a giant bag of cocaine, that's fair game, but they can't open the jewelry box if they're looking for a baseball bat. And that's kind of how the EEOC operates. They receive a complaint, and they're limited to documents and information and things related to that complaint. They're not there to just look around. OFCCP, on the other hand, has relatively broad investigatory authority. They select contractors for audit through an administratively neutral process that, while not exactly random, is meant to prohibit them from targeting a particular employer. Let's advance the slide. When you lose the lottery and OFCCP pulls your bingo ball from the hopper, they are entitled to anything and everything that is reasonably related to non-discrimination and affirmative action. And that's most of the business records you keep. In some instances, they might have to show a reason for requesting certain documents or information, but that bar is pretty low and relatively easy for the OFCCP to clear. So when they show up at the door, they are going to rifle through your underwear drawer. And to make things even more complicated, the EEOC and the OFCCP have what is called a Memorandum of Understanding, or an MOU. Basically, the agencies have agreed to share information with one another, which is why, on occasion, you can find yourself answering questions thrown at you from an EEOC investigator and an OFCCP compliance officer regarding the same things. Usually, they'll eventually decide which agency will take over the investigation. But every once in a while, we'll see both agencies working together throughout the whole ordeal. But that's pretty rare. As a general rule, if you're a federal contractor, the EEOC is more likely to handle your individual complaints, and the OFCCP is more interested in systemic issues that affect entire classes of people, like all female machinists or what have you. The point is, people are watching. Your employees are always watching and can report what they see to the EEOC or the OFCCP if they've ever heard of them. And for federal contractors, the OFCCP can always just drop by. So it's a good idea to keep the house in order. Let's go to the next slide. Now, when things go wrong, we have to try to make them right. The good news is neither Title VII nor OFCCP's regulations contain provisions for fines or jail time. No, EEOC and OFCCP enforcement is primarily remedial, which means the agencies try to put victims of discrimination in the position they would have been absent the allegedly discriminatory acts. They can order reinstatement, promotion, benefits, payments, lost back pay, seniority credit, and things of that nature. Frighteningly, the OFCCP can also technically have federal contract payments withheld, have those contracts canceled, or even debar contractors, preventing them from entering into new federal contracts for a period of time. Those remedies are rare, but they do happen. But there's also public relations and employee relations issues to consider. Both the EEOC and the OFCCP are fond of issuing press releases, detailing their findings on the internet for all to see forever. Damage to a company's reputation, either internally or externally, can be greater than the settlement dollars paid out. So when OFCCP comes knocking, we want to be able to throw open the door to reveal a freshly vacuumed living room, if you know what I mean. Hopefully, it's because your living room always looks like that, right? Let's advance the slide. When OFCCP comes knocking, the audit can be one of several types. Let's advance the slide. For almost the entirety of the Obama administration, the OFCCP exclusively conducted full compliance reviews in which they turned over every single stone. And if they didn't find anything, well, they turned them over again. They asked for a copy of your current Executive Order AAP for women and people of color. They asked for your current Section 503 AAP for individuals with disabilities. They asked to see your current VEVRA AAP for protected veterans. And they asked for about 22 other specific things to verify that you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing and that nothing you're doing is leading to illegal discrimination. It is a time and resource intensive process for all involved, both the company and the agency. If you're curious, you can find the Standard Compliance Evaluation Report, or SCR form. This is the actual form that OFCCP compliance officers have to fill out when they audit you, and you can see just how detailed those reviews can get. The form itself is 21 pages long, and the instructions for filling it out run 8 pages, and they're all part of a 500-page manual called the Federal Contract Compliance Manual, or FCCM. It's available online, and I highly recommend that you take a look as a way of crawling into the mind of an OFCCP compliance officer. It's very enlightening. Just search OFCCP FCCM, and it'll take you right to it. Point is, a full audit can be pretty intense, but it's not the only form of audit OFCCP has in their toolkit. OFCCP's regulations also provide for something called a compliance check. That's often thought of as an audit light, in which OFCCP is only interested in making sure that you can comply, that there are policies and practices and systems in place for compliance, not so much the extent to which you do comply. Those can be done on their own or as part of what's called a pre-award compliance evaluation. A pre-award audit is supposed to occur when you bid for a federal contract over a certain dollar amount, currently $10 million or more. OFCCP technically has 15 days to notify the contracting agency of their intention to perform a pre-award review, and if they don't, the contracting agency can go ahead with the bidding process without it. And since OFCCP is busy doing those time and resource-intensive full audits, they don't tend to do many pre-award reviews. But they are going to start doing standalone compliance checks again. In fact, they already have. You submit a Women and People of Color Goal Attainment Report, some detail regarding your good faith efforts for unmet goals, your assessment of disability and veteran outreach and recruiting efforts, and about a year of the data metrics, job openings, jobs filled, etc. You submit some examples of a few job advertisements with the EO tagline, along with evidence that your jobs are listed with the state job boards and information regarding accommodations, if any, and that's it. If you can produce all of that stuff, you've necessarily performed a job group analysis, calculated availability, set placement rate goals, performed a disability utilization analysis, and on and on. OFCCP just verifies that you can comply, but shouldn't be evaluating whether and to what extent they think your compliance efforts were sufficient, much less run things like impact ratio analyses on your hiring data or be looking at your compensation. Now, in the past several years, OFCCP has gotten fairly enamored again with the Corporate Management Compliance Evaluation, or CMCE, which is kind of a hybrid between a full audit and a focused review that we're going to talk about here in just a second. A CMCE is still a full audit, but with kind of a focused review tacked on, where they take a deep dive looking at upper management positions and potential glass ceiling issues. So the new audits that OFCCP is currently introducing are the compliance check and the focused review. We've already talked about the compliance checks, and if you bother preparing AAPs at all, you shouldn't be overly concerned about those. But a focused review is more like a full audit, but in a discrete area. So instead of making you produce the whole ball of wax across all of your AAP obligations, they take a deeper dive into a particular portion. And they're starting with focusing on the Section 503 AAP for individuals with disabilities. OFCCP will ask you to provide more information about your disability AAP, but less regarding 11246 and nothing regarding VEBRA. So we'll get back to focus reviews in more detail here in just a minute. But first, let's talk briefly about the audit experience because it's so much fun. Let's advance this slide. So what all is involved in an OFCCP audit? Well, briefly, regardless of the audit type, it all starts when you receive in the mail what is called a scheduling letter. And by starts, we mean a virtual clock actually starts as soon as OFCCP knows you got the letter, and you have no more than 30 calendar days to provide a whole host of information and documents outlined in that letter. As an aside, OFCCP has historically sent scheduling letters by certified mail so that there's a record of when it was received. The same thing can be accomplished by an email with a read receipt or some other means, so don't be surprised if and when the OFCCP decides to start operating in the 21st century and starts emailing scheduling letters and starting the clock when they confirm receipt. Actually, things start a little before that. You see, OFCCP spends a lot of time and resources developing their audit list, and when it's complete, they now publish the list on their website. Just search for OFCCP FOIA Library, FOIA, and you'll find it. OFCCP's current practice is to publish the list of contractors that have been selected but not yet scheduled for review at least 45 days before the first scheduling letter is sent out. So really, you have at least 45 days notice before you'll get a scheduling letter and 30 days after that to respond. And I highly recommend you make good use of that time. Okay, so you get the letter, and you're not scrambling for the next month putting together the desk audit submission materials because you knew it was coming, and you're totally prepared. You send off your submission before the deadline passes, and you wait. But typically, you don't wait long. OFCCP will often start with the follow-up requests for information and additional documents and data, etc., soon after they receive the desk audit materials. And if they determine it's necessary, they can come on site for a little visit, look around, and talk to your people. Audits can go on for literally years. Just ask Bank of America. They may hold the record for the longest running OFCCP audit, which lasted about 25 years. They weren't even Bank of America when the audit began, but I digress. Most people want OFCCP audits to end, and that can happen in a few ways. If they don't find anything bad, you'll usually get an audit closure letter letting you know that they're ending the review and not citing you for any violations. They don't actually say you're compliant. OFCCP does not certify compliance. They say they couldn't find anything wrong, which isn't exactly the same thing, but I'll take it if it's offered. And you should too, because if they do find violations, they're going to want you to fix them. OFCCP violations fall into two broad categories: technical violations and discrimination violations. Technical violations are things like not properly displaying the EEO is the law poster. The remedy for that is to start properly displaying the EEO is the law poster. It's not the end of the world for an audit to end with a few technical violations. It's not great, but it's not the type of thing that people tend to get fired over. You fix it and you move on. Discrimination violations, on the other hand, are exactly what they sound like, and OFCCP is going to want to execute a contract directly with your organization detailing all the things that you're going to do to make those things right. If you negotiate a settlement with OFCCP outside of court, that contract is called a conciliation agreement. If you end up in court and settle, it's called a consent decree and has to be approved by the judge. And if you end up in court and you don't settle, but you lose, it's called a court order, but things aren't going to get that far. Don't worry. When you settle discrimination allegations with the OFCCP and you sign a conciliation agreement, that contract typically involves some degree of continued OFCCP oversight until the agreement is satisfied. That usually involves submitting follow-up reports for about a year or two that demonstrate your compliance. And if you violate the settlement agreement, OFCCP can take you straight to court to enforce it, so don't do that. This is where I note that many people in many organizations view the compliance team much like the vice principal in high school, right? The vice principal tends to be the disciplinarian, and they're not often very popular. People often feel like compliance is trying to tell them how to do their job. My answer to that is they're not. They're trying to keep the federal government from coming in and telling you how to do your job. So if you ever wanted a backseat driver at work, if you ever wondered what that's really like, go ahead and ignore your compliance team. But if you don't want a representative from the federal government telling you how to do your job, maybe go ahead and listen to compliance. Let's advance the slide. So finally, we're going to dive into the new, quote unquote, new focused reviews. Let's move forward to advance the slide. As I mentioned, focused reviews have been on the books for years. It's just been a while since anyone has seen one in the wild. But they're not extinct. In fact, they're about to thrive again. They'll start just like any other audit with a scheduling letter that will specify that it is a focused review. In fact, the audit list that OFCCP publishes on their website also indicates whether a particular AAP location or function was selected for a full audit, compliance check, focused review, etc. So you know well ahead of time what is coming. The first focused reviews will be Section 503 focused reviews, but OFCCP has every intention of rolling out VEVRA focused reviews as well, and perhaps other types down the road. And like any audit, you need to prepare for a focused review. I recommend preparing in three distinct areas: the desk audit submission, anticipated OFCCP follow-up requests for information, and the required on-site visit. You see, unlike a full audit in which an on-site visit is optional depending on the compliance officer's determination of need, an on-site is required in every focused review. That's baked right into OFCCP's regulations. Compliance officers don't have the discretion to skip an on-site. So if you're selected for a focused review, go vacuum the rug. Let's advance the slide. Preparing the desk audit submission is more than just making copies of existing documents and stuffing them in a binder. You're going to want to review those materials and make sure that they present everything in the best light possible. The focused review scheduling letter asks for 12 things at the start of an audit. Here are the first 6, and if we advance the slide, we get to 7 through 12. That may seem like a lot of stuff, but it isn't quite as much as it seems at first blush. When you get under the hood here, you'll realize that your response to number 3, which is evidence of the formation of AAP job groups, is actually contained already in your response to number 1, which is your EEO 11246 AAP. You can't prepare an AAP for women and people of color without forming AAP job groups, so it's really 11 items. But then you'll realize that the evaluation of prior year outreach and recruiting efforts for individuals with disabilities is part of your disability AAP, which you're already supplying in response to number 2. So that knocks things down to 10 different items. But you might need to augment some of those 10 items. For instance, for number 5, OFCCP wants document evidence of your internal audit and reporting. Your AAP narrative should have a section for that, but how detailed is it? My guess is it says that you do it, but that's about it. Well, OFCCP wants the receipts. And what about this business regarding summary data showing total applicants and hires and total disability applicants and hires? Is OFCCP going to perform an impact ratio analysis like they do for women and people of color? If so, should you? Yeah, I think you probably should. What would be really handy here is some sort of checklist that helps you track the gathering and review of all of these items. preferably accompanied by some guidance. That, ladies and gentlemen, is called foreshadowing. Let's advance the slide. There we go. Once you've prepared and reviewed the desk audit materials and submitted them, you need to be prepared for likely OFCCP follow-up requests. And those requests can start sooner than you think after the agency receives your submission. Sometimes they start the same day. So you probably want to be prepared ahead of time. Based on recent OFCCP guidance and public statements, we have a pretty good idea of what will most likely be asked in every focused review. This isn't a comprehensive list of everything OFCCP could ask for, so there could be more in your particular audit, but these are the things about which we think OFCCP is most likely to ask. Employee rosters, including disability self-identification information and pay information. Employment transaction summary data, right, including disability status. Information about medical examinations or questions that are administered to your applicants or employees. Policies and procedures regarding handling medical information. Job application accommodation process. Information about the extent to which your website is accessible. Information about your accommodation system. How much buy-in you have from company leadership, chief accessibility officer, and maybe some others. But these are the main things. Some of these things reflect hard and fast requirements, and some reflect, let's call them strong suggestions. And it's important to know the difference, right? Providing reasonable accommodation for your job application process is a hard and fast requirement. And I'm sure you have information on your career page about how to request that help. Website accessibility, on the other hand, is not actually a requirement. OFCCP decided not to make contractors be Section 508 compliant, meaning online systems are fully compatible with assistive technologies like screen readers and alternate input devices. That's a requirement for federal agencies like the OFCCP, but it's not actually required of you as a federal contractor. Nonetheless, a focused review is less about whether or not you're complying and more about how well you're complying. So OFCCP is going to have questions about how your online systems stack up in that regard. And beats me is not the type of response that inspires confidence in your overall affirmative action program. So you might want to be prepared with something a little more substantive. And do you have a centralized accommodation system? Is that even required? What does buy-in from company leadership mean, and is that required? And I'm sorry, but is Chief Accessibility Officer even a thing? The answers, by the way, are no, no, and no, but these are nonetheless things OFCCP is likely going to want to talk about, and the more you have to say, the better your compliance posture looks to the regulator. Let's advance the slide. Finally, we know OFCCP is coming, so you need to prepare for the inevitable on-site. You'll want to schedule the on-site with OFCCP. Don't let them dictate when and where. Work together with them on that. Make sure everyone has appropriate space to work in. Prepare your managers and employees for interviews. That's kind of key. But the preparation you give to managers and supervisors is very different from the type of preparation you're allowed to give to employees. So you need to know the difference and be prepared to discuss how you prepare to these people with the OFCCP. And, of course, get your house in order. Look at your facility with a critical eye. See what the OFCCP will see. Once again, it might be handy to have a resource you can use to help manage all of this. Let's advance the slide. And the good news is just such a resource is available. Our motto is what you need when you need it, and in a Section 503 focused review, you're going to want to have our checklist. It's useful, it's happy, it's colorful. We've made it available for download for all webinar participants today, and I highly recommend you check it out. Let's advance the slide. What I want you to be able to do is head into your focused review with confidence, keeping track of your due dates and responsible parties. Be able to prepare your desk audit submission and know that you're doing it right. Be ready for OFCCP's follow-up requests and get your house in order for the on-site. Let's take a closer look and advance the slide. So the very first page, you can note when the scheduling letter was received, calculate the due date for the desk audit submission. That's when everything has to get sent out to OFCCP, but also determine your internal due dates to make sure you have enough time to review and finalize everything before the big due date. You can note the OFCCP contact information here and have that handy. And you want to identify the key personnel that are going to help you get across the finish line. You're going to need input from talent acquisition, payroll, your applicant tracking system experts, etc. This first page allows you to keep track of who's who and not go searching through your email inbox or those sticky notes around your monitor for the contact information when you need it. I highly recommend also setting calendar reminders for yourself and your key personnel once you've filled out this page so you can keep everything on track. Next slide. Now, when preparing the desk audit submission, for each requested item, you want to note when it's due. That's your internal due date, when you want to see it. When the item was finalized, and who's responsible for getting it to you, what their status is, and any other notes that you need to keep. Each item is detailed here and includes BCGI notes, commentary, and guidance to try to help you along the way. So let's take a look. Item number 1 is your EO 11246 AAP for women and people of color. That would be your AAP narrative, your organizational profile, job group analysis, calculation of availability, comparison to incumbency, and setting of placement goals. Pretty straightforward, but why is OFCCP asking for your AAP for women and people of color in a disability-focused review? Well, they need the job group analysis. That's pretty much it. So make sure your job group analysis is in order, and you're pretty much done with item 1. For item 2, your disability AAP, we note that you shouldn't just PDF your AAP narrative and call it a day. Several sections of that AAP are probably going to require closer scrutiny. Specifically, we note that your response to items 4, 5, 11, and 12 will likely require some refinement. OFCCP's scheduling letter doesn't do the best job of ordering things and connecting all the dots, so we try to do it for you here in the checklist. For item 5, the notes help you figure out what document evidence means with regard to your internal audit and reporting requirement by detailing the types of documents OFCCP typically asks for. The checklist is chock full of what I hope is helpful information. For item 11, there's a dead link to BCGI's sample personnel process review form. OFCCP asks for document evidence of your review of personnel processes, but neither the agency nor its regulations do a very good job of explaining what that is. Well, I think we've got it figured out, and BCGI has developed a tool for that. We haven't launched it officially yet, but if you're a paying BCGI member, drop me a line and I'll get you the beta version. In fact, if you need it and you're not a member, drop me a line anyway and let me know how much you enjoyed today's webinar, because flattery will in fact get you everywhere. Let's advance the slide. We do the same thing for the OFCCP's likely follow-up requests. We offer several suggestions for how to present the best compliance posture possible by not being caught flat-footed by OFCCP's questions. When OFCCP asks for detailed employee rosters, you'll be able to say, you bet, no problem. If OFCCP starts asking about disparities in selection rates for individuals with disabilities, you can say, we noticed that too. And here's what we found in our follow-up investigation. And here's a little hint. It turns out that after almost 30 years of the ADA telling everyone that they don't have to talk to about their disability status with their employer except in specific circumstances, people aren't exactly chomping at the bit to self-identify their disability status. So that data may be a wee bit unreliable, but we're trying to educate our workforce and encourage more self-identification so that those numbers might be more meaningful and revealing sometime down the road. But today, not so much. And oh yeah, when was the last time you tested your online application accommodation process? Have you ever? I highly recommend that you do. An advocacy group did just that recently, targeting Fortune 500 companies, companies with all the resources they need. And do you want to guess what they found? None of them worked. Only about 5% of the companies that they surveyed even responded to the request for an accommodation. None of them actually ended up providing an accommodation. That's not good, folks. And to the OFCCP, that's revealing. Test it. Trust me, because sure as I'm sitting here today yammering at you, OFCCP compliance officers are gearing up to apply to one of your open positions, request an accommodation, sit back, and see what happens. Then they're going to come and talk to you about it. And like I mentioned, website accessibility is not actually required by OFCCP's regulations, but the agency is strongly suggesting that a company engaged in equal employment opportunity for individuals with disabilities should be interested in how accessible or not their electronic systems are for such people. Do they have a point? Sure. But the lawyer in me is screaming, it isn't required. Tell them to go pound sand. And that's why I became a consultant, folks. The lawyer is right. It isn't required, and you are well within your rights to refuse to even talk about it with the OFCCP. But if you want your focused review to go smoothly and close with a glowing letter stating that they didn't find any violations, you might want to be prepared to talk about this. Just demonstrating that the organization has at least enough curiosity in this area to assess its website accessibility is at least something. And because this isn't actually a requirement, there's no harm in admitting that the company's website isn't as accessible as you would like it to be, if that's the case. But you can't do anything if you don't know where to begin, and that requires some sort of assessment. I'm pretty sure I know the tool that OFCCP is going to use to assess your website accessibility, and I've provided a link to that resource there in the slide and again in the checklist. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Finally, the OnSite. We try to help you through the process and make sure that it's not just the living room that sparkles, but the whole house. I mentioned that you should schedule dates and times for the OnSite with OFCCP. Typically, the compliance officer will simply notify you that the agency is coming for a visit on such and such a date and would like to review certain documents and interview certain people when they're there. And that's all well and good, but the agency doesn't actually get to dictate the when and the where and the what and the who. They're supposed to work with you to schedule dates that are mutually acceptable. So be prepared by knowing the vacation schedules of your key personnel and be polite about it, but don't get pushed around. And prepare your people. Nobody wants to come to work and be surprised that they need to sit for an interview with a representative from the federal government. But as I mentioned, there's a world of difference between what you can and can't say to the managers and supervisors that OFCCP has selected for an interview and what you can and can't say to non-management employees about it all. The checklist should at least get you started navigating that thorny little bramble. You'll also want to designate workspace for the OFCCP and for your team. You might need more space than you think, so this is something you'll want to take into account when scheduling the OnSite. You can't have them show up and have no place to sit. And that critical eye I mentioned before, the checklist walks you through the types of things we think you should be looking for. Are your walkways and ramps in good condition? What about the handrails? Are they loose? Are they rusty? What about your accessible parking spaces? Are they still clearly marked, or is it time to lay down some fresh paint? Are doorways wide enough to accommodate people in wheelchairs, specifically emergency exits? Are there accessible stalls in the restrooms? Are the accessibility features in good repair? Is the place generally well kept and clean? Are there other things you can think of now that we're trying to think of them? Like, is lighting sufficient for people with lower vision? Are any bulbs in need of replacing? Do you have an employee resource group you can lean on to help you think these things through? Finally, we recommend reviewing any disability-related complaints for potential issues. Are there any issues still outstanding? That would be good to know. But do those complaints, even if they're resolved, point you in any directions you haven't already thought to go? The point is, leverage your resources so that you can welcome the OFCCP into your home because you've worked hard to develop and implement a meaningful disability affirmative action program, and you think critically about what real disability inclusion looks like. Everything doesn't have to be perfect, but you need to know what shines and what could use a little shining so that you can have an honest conversation and speak confidently about where the company has come from, where it is today, and where it plans to be tomorrow. Let's advance the slide. Final thoughts. Sit up straight. My mother always told me that, and I'm glad she did. Your compliance posture is important. Just compliance is just the baseline in an OFCCP focused review. The more engaged you are, the more OFCCP can see your company's good faith engagement in the process, which is what this is all about. Keep in mind that the degree of compliance is measured by your effort, not necessarily the results. So don't be afraid to engage with OFCCP. Ask them what you can do better and how. Make them a partner. If they're going to tell you that you're supposed to do better, make them show you the way. And finally, be polite about it, but be on guard for violations that aren't violations. Much of what OFCCP will want to discuss in a focused review will be aspirational, which is fine. They want to push contractors out of the notion that the disability AAP is just a paperwork exercise. And I applaud them for that. The purpose of all of this is people, after all. It shouldn't be just a paperwork exercise. And believe me, if it is, it isn't just the OFCCP that will notice, but also the people who are looking for a place where they can be a loyal employee and where they can thrive. We are at record low unemployment, and we're all competing for the best talent. Where's that talent going to come from? Companies can only poach employees from each other so much. But what if there was an ignored segment of the workforce that wants to work, wants to succeed, and will work hard if just given the chance? How can you tap into that? Well, maybe by engaging in this process in good faith. You can do it just because it's the law, and you can do the bare minimum that the law requires, or you can do it because it makes good business sense and make your workplace one where everyone wants to be. All right, that's it. I'm done. Let's advance the slide. I'm going to leave this slide up while we take a look. I think Guy left us about 10 minutes. So we'll see if there are some questions that I can answer that came in during the presentation. But before I jump into your questions, I do want to emphasize that if you have questions about anything I discussed today, whether you're a BCGI member or not, I want you to call me or email me. Am I going to give you a pitch? Am I going to encourage you to join? Probably, but not until I've answered your questions. That's my promise, and you can hold me to it. All right.
That's
Lori?
great. Thanks, Matt. So we did have a question that came in while you were talking. Danielle wanted to know, when do they start sending the scheduling letters?
They have already begun. So scheduling letters are going out now. They tend to go out in kind of waves out of each regional OFCCP office based on their workload. So they'll send out first round, which is out now. If you're in the first round, you've probably already received it. If not, you're in the queue, and there's no way to know when it's coming. But knowing that you're on the list, you can start preparing now. And that's something that I highly recommend. What else?
Thank you. We've got another interesting question. We are in a building that is operated by a property manager. In this case, do we need to connect with the OFCCP rep to talk about what we have control over in our building?
I would not recommend it. Because OFCCP is unlikely to be terribly sympathetic about a situation in which, we're renting space and the space is actually controlled by somebody else. OFCCP has a long-standing kind of ethos that your compliance obligations are yours. And if you farm out those obligations to a third party, you are still responsible for them. So if you're required to operate in a building that is accessible to the public and your property manager just refuses to install, let's say for the sake of conversation, a ramp. They can be cited under the ADA, but most likely it will be you. And the fact that somebody else kind of operates and is responsible for the physical premises will not save you. So I think the better course of action would be to, look at your facility with a critical eye, and then connect with the property management company to see if and what can be done, and at least know where you stand, so that if it comes up with the OFCCP, you can at least say, these are issues that we have raised with the people who are responsible for the physical location, and that's something that we're working on. Does that make sense?
Thank you. So what I'm hearing, I think, is that what we're talking about here is as much transparency as possible. When you have control over the situation, be transparent. When you're working on the situation, be transparent, correct?
Well, the lawyer in me gets kind of twitchy when I hear too much transparency. It's always a delicate balancing act, right? You don't get any points for falling on your sword exactly, but you will appear much more transparent if you're prepared for the question and you have a robust and substantive answer. Where the question involves something that isn't actually a violation, like website accessibility, you can be more transparent, you can be more honest, because the consequences of whatever answer you give, well, there aren't any. If your website is not at all accessible, that's not a violation. OFCCP has no authority to require you to do anything there. But if they see that you're aware of it, that it's something that the company is concerned with, that you're looking into, that goes a long way. And if, on the other hand, they have questions about discrepancies in pay between people who have and have not self-identified as an individual with a disability, your answers are necessarily going to be a little more guarded, and want to focus on the reliability of that data and not admit to wrongdoing. Nothing requires you to admit to a violation. So it depends. But at the end of the day, OFCCP wants to see that the organization is engaged in good faith. They can tell, they can spot from a mile away an organization that is just going through the motions, that is just doing the bare minimum required by law. And one might say, well, if they think that the bare minimum required by law is insufficient, they should change the law. And I would say you're right. But that's not the only tool in their toolkit. And this is one way that they're using to try to force people to kind of advance the ball a little bit. And you can decide, if you want to fight with the OFCCP, by all means, have at it, fight them. I can recommend some very good lawyers who will be happy to take your money for that fight. But if you want to take another tack, then yeah, show OFCCP something. Show them something that they haven't seen before. And if you can't, like I said, engage them. Very often they don't know the challenges that you face, and it may need to be explained to them. The resources for outreach and recruitment for individuals with disabilities. The resources out there are not particularly robust, and those resources have been overwhelmed since March 31st of 2014, when OFCCP's revised disability regulations went into effect, and all the federal contractors started inundating them saying, help me, help me. So what do? We're 5 years down the road, and I think it's a legitimate question to OFCCP. Look, you're giving me the same list of outreach and recruiting resources that have been published on the web for the last 5 years. That's not sufficient. We need more. What else can you do? Because if the resources aren't there, how much can OFCCP really expect you to do? So you want to engage with the agency. You want to show them that you are engaged, and that, frankly, the company cares enough about the experience that an individual with a disability might have applying for a job or working at your organization. And that's what you want to show. is that the company's curious about that they want to understand that experience, and therefore that's the first step in making that experience better if you can. And it's the conversation that OFCCP wants to engage in. And a really easy way to distinguish yourself immediately is to go ahead and engage in that conversation to the degree appropriate.
Well, I think that just about wraps up our time. Matt, thank you so much. I know we did have a few extra questions that came in. We will get back to you with answers. One of the questions was regarding this slide deck and presentation that will be sent around in a follow-up email, so you'll all get a link to that. Thank you again for your time today, Matt, and thank you all for coming. This was great, and good luck to all of you. On behalf of America's Job Exchange, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you on a webinar again real soon.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye, all.
Take care, everyone.